Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Informed Dissent, a news podcast that brings you dispatches from the culture wars. I'm Ben Appel. I'm here with Lisa Sellen Davis, Eliza Mondegreen, Jamie Reed, and Corey Cohn. Today, we're going to discuss something that some of us maybe have been dreading and others are eager to talk about, but we're going to talk about pronouns and what our own personal policies are and argue for and against and so on. Not really argue, but just kind of flesh that all out and then, kind of give an overview of how we got here. First, we're going to go into this week's news briefly. Jamie, I wanted to start. We were talking about a new memo that came out that the Pentagon released that will actually remove trans troops from the military. So we wanted to discuss that. But I also wanted to start by asking Jamie about a testimony that she gave this week in West Virginia, and then something that she and Corey have coming up in New Hampshire next week.
Perfect. Thanks, Ben. So, West Virginia is a state that I think many of us thought was in the ban column, kind of was checked off as, yep, it had a ban. Well, it had a ban with a weird loophole. And that loophole was that if a young person was going to start a puberty blocker or cross-sex hormones, they could do so as long as they had a letter from two independent clinicians who basically said that they had a severe case of gender dysphoria, that the parents are consenting. And then there was also this really weird little caveat that they would be put on the lowest dose of treatment, which, if anybody knows anything about puberty blockers, it does not work like that. So they have a supermajority. It's a red state with a supermajority, and they had a hearing about removing this loophole and just basically making it an outright ban. I testified yesterday in that hearing, and there was a lone Democrat who was really feisty and was really wanting to ask a whole bunch of questions. And I had a really good, quite challenging interaction with him, but he wanted to know if medicine is individualized, and don't I agree that everybody should get individualized treatment, and also wanted to know basically if I was willing to throw out the entirety of behavioral health diagnoses and the DSM-5. And then finally, specifically said, I don't want to hear about international things. Is there any US-based organization, institution that is opposed to this? And he straight up was basically saying, I'm a Democrat. I believe in institutions. All of these institutions support this. So what do you have to counter that? So we had a long, kind of in-depth questioning around what the American Surgical Association believes. And then he was asking me if I think that they reviewed the literature back into puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. I believe that they did because they know that they're the last stop in the protocol. But it was a really interesting interaction. And I also testified with a young D sister named Simon Price, and he was awesome too.
That's great. So and I think it was the College of Pediatricians, is that right? The more conservative organization that also came out against.
And I don't really
Okay,
count
so you
that.
weren't, okay, got it. But I did see part of your testimony, which
More
was really,
conservative is they're the
I
ones
mean,
who don't want gay people to be
they
able
don't
to.
like,
okay,
yeah,
but they are an organization, but you
they
could you
are.
could actually technically say, well, there is this medical organization that opposes this as well. And that perhaps they've looked at the data. It might not be based solely on belief. I mean, it's an organization of professional,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
right?
There's
Okay,
there's dozens of us.
does right. Okay, but I did see part of your testimony, and I did watch that argument about the DSM-5 and how imperfect it is. You're like, it's an imperfect document. It's an evolving document. Years ago, being a lesbian was classified as a
Mhm.
as a mental disorder, and so it's really imperfect, and it's not serving us, which I thought was really effective. So it did pass. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so that passed out of committee. Most of these are in committee hearings, and they have to go out to the full floor, but they have a supermajority, and I really think that they're gonna move this along.
Okay,
So
so this loophole will be no more. Is that what you're saying?
should be closed. So
Okay.
yeah, so we'll see Kansas, West Virginia, then Corey and I are headed to New Hampshire. New Hampshire is another one of these weird states. So they passed a bottom surgery ban, I think in
Mhm.
2021. Um, and now they're looking at a top surgery ban and a separate bill as a puberty blocker ban. So Corey and I, Simon, Prisha Mosley, Sidewalk Steve, will be there to testify in New Hampshire.
And this is for minors, just under 18, right?
Correct.
Okay.
I spoke to one of those New Hampshire Democratic state senators a while back.
Jonah Wheeler?
I don't remember his name, but I wouldn't say it anyway. And one of the things that
Yes.
that I found interesting was he did not understand the issue at all. And they passed that surgical ban kind of because they thought, these are very intense surgeries and children shouldn't have them. But then they discovered that no child in New Hampshire had such a surgery. And the senator was still very much in the had accepted a lot of what we refer to as gender ideology, a lot of beliefs in innate gender identity and the importance of respecting that. So I just found that very interesting when I talked to him. And I actually feel like, I don't remember when that was, but I think I reached out to you, Jamie. We had talked briefly about preparing a presentation for them, but then there's never enough time to do those things.
No.
But so you guys are doing that now, so that's good. That's my bit of background about how I experienced the Democrats there.
I think the surgical step is always really interesting because I do feel like Dems are a little bit more willing to go, sure, no surgery.
But part of that is that they don't think that it's happening. But anyway,
yeah.
Corey, go ahead.
Well, in 2023 in Texas, at the last minute, when it seemed like it was inevitable that SB 14 was going to pass, the Democrats spent like 2 hours proposing amendments, and they were like desperate at the last hour to find a compromise. And it's crazy that they wouldn't really give us any sort of attention leading up to that last minute. And then at the last minute, they're like, oh my gosh, we got to do anything to mitigate this. But it was already too late. It was already too late.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask Jamie about testifying in West Virginia and being grilled by a Democratic lawmaker. How often do the Democrats tend to engage with you?
Never.
Okay, that's what I thought.
In the past, I had been asked one question from a Democrat in Missouri before, and the only question was, "You're not a doctor, right?" Like, yeah, I'm not a doctor. And I was really happy to engage with this representative. I would much rather have the engagement than the pretending like we don't exist.
Yep.
I'll take the hard questions over that any day.
Yeah. Well, that's great. So let's talk about the ban, the trans military ban. So it looks like there was a memo that came out yesterday. Initially, the policy was that folks who were already in the military that had transitioned could continue to transition and identify as trans. New members that were coming into the military had to identify as their natal sex, and they could not pursue transition. Now, a memo, and this is in response to a lawsuit filed by LGBTQ rights groups that was going against President Trump's executive order. Now, a new memo was released in response to that lawsuit from the Pentagon saying within 30 days, the Pentagon has to identify service members who have a current diagnosis or history of or exhibit symptoms consistent with gender dysphoria, and that those identified will be disqualified from service and removed from their jobs. They'll receive an honorable separation unless their record reflects otherwise, according to the memo. This is from NBC News. And then it says some trans members can be considered for a waiver on a case-by-case basis. And it says, quote, provided there is a compelling government interest in accessing the applicant that directly supports warfighting capabilities. And this is really weird. It says they must show 36 consecutive months of stability in their sex assigned at birth without clinical distress or impairment of functioning. that they have never pursued medical transition and that they are willing to adhere to the standards for their sex. I feel like that's going to be a very small group. You know, someone that's been diagnosed with gender dysphoria, that's never pursued medical transition, that's been living as their natal sex for 36 months. You know, that
Yeah.
sounds like who is that? That's a really rare character, I would imagine. What do you guys think about them rooting out people that have a history of gender dysphoria and removing them? That sounds kind of strange to me.
Why?
It sounds very, I mean, you know, not to say, you know, this McCarthyist, but it just sounds like, look, there's certainly an argument, a strong argument, or an argument for um, disallowing people who rely on medicine to perform an active duty. That,
Mhm.
you know, there are other disqualifying ailments where people cannot serve because this can compromise their ability to do their jobs, right? This is really shouldn't be different. So that's a really strong argument for it, right? But it's strange, I guess, Corey, what I'm saying is that it's just unfortunate that we're here. It's unfortunate that this is where we are now, where the Pentagon is sifting through medical records of service members who perhaps have good records of service and perhaps have done a lot to serve the country. You know, who knows
Yeah.
what kind of things they could have accomplished in protecting us and advancing our interests, and then to be rooted out and told that they have to leave, that's just strange to me. It's unfortunate.
Yeah.
What do you think?
It was so regardless how somebody identifies, right? Whether like you shouldn't have to be a Christian to serve in the military. And yeah, as you recall, there was a lot of tension in 2001 and 2002 and so on, immediately after the United States was attacked by Islamic jihadis. And there was a lot of suspicion of American Muslims, but we would not have accepted kicking Muslim members of the military out.
Right.
Or killing, that's straight, flat, like everybody agrees on that one.
Right.
But kicking them out as well, we would not have tolerated that. And so somebody should not be removed from service because of a belief. However, if that belief is, I am a member of the opposite sex and I needed to be treated accordingly, then that belief is not compatible. That insistence, not the belief, the insistence on other people accommodating that belief is not consistent with being able to serve in the military, I think.
What if you
So-
were a practicing Muslim and you had to pray 5 times a day and you're in the middle of battle and it's like, oops, I got to whip out my prayer rug and face east? That would interfere with your ability to do your job too, right?
Right. So your insistence on like there's this goes into an area that I can't really follow very well, but there's reasonable accommodations and not reasonable accommodations. And I think it's reasonable if somebody wants to legally change their name. All right, weirdo, fine, we'll call you Corinna. But then for somebody to insist I need to be in the same barracks as the female soldiers, that's not a reasonable accommodation.
Well, also, if you have a mental health diagnosis, if you have borderline or bipolar, or there are you might not be able to serve.
Yeah.
And also, I think people need to be more aware of, they can make that decision to transition, but there are consequences for a choice that you make. And I'm not
Yes.
saying I agree with the consequences necessarily, but I do feel like there's this, I get to do whatever I want, including redefine sex and make everyone, participate in it and play on whatever sports team. And because my gender identity is so spiritual and above the physical world and matters more.
Yes.
I'm curious, because autogonophilia is correlated to masculine kind of jobs, that when you there are a lot of HPs who have very masculine jobs. I mean, the late Jamie, Elisa Ray, etc. Shoup was a mechanic in the Army. There's that Navy SEAL who detransitioned and who was basically like, oh, I have a sexual fetish, I'm not a woman. um I would
Right.
imagine there are quite a few autogynephiles in the military, and I think if there was a cross-dressing drone pilot, I mean, who was great at his job, that would be the exception that they made. If the person was saying, yeah, I understand the reality of sex, I didn't change my body, I have this thing about me, and I'm super good at my job and protect my country, then I guess they'd let that person stay. But how, again, I don't know how most autogynephiles, well, we don't know if it's most. The loudest autogynephiles are the ones pretending that autogynephilia doesn't exist.
Right. And also, and there's, I guess, I don't know if this would be reasonable to speculate about at all. I think it would. I mean, to think that there is a large overlap, in the Venn diagram between like people who have a high skill for analysis, for data, for, and so on, and autogynephilia, autism, that spectrum. There are probably a lot of folks. Lisa, you said there's likely a lot of trans people that are in the military. They're probably autogynephilic. Very few HSTS, I would imagine. Um, and so that's something to consider and think about. I mean, there's might be an overlap there, but I guess that brings us to what also came out this week with Chris Rufo's report in was it on his Substack? I think it was on his Substack that he released it. Yeah, on his Substack. The NSA's secret sex chats. Um, Intelligence officials maintained a chat room to discuss polyamory and transgender surgeries, internal documents reveal. Now, this is the NSA, so this is the intelligence agency. So when they're talking about the Pentagon, that's the military specifically. So this is a different area, but I guess it's related because it has to do with
Yeah.
national security.
Intelligence.
Right. And this actually might be the place where there's even more of that overlap, I guess. I don't know, for analysis and data and intelligence and so on. Anyway, Corey, what did you guys think about the story? I mean, Tulsi Gabbard has now removed, I think, 100 service members and revoked their security clearances for talking inappropriately in these chat rooms. And in the chat rooms, I think an LGBTQ DI or diversity chat room, but in the NSA's server, where they were having these conversations about, their surgeries, about gender euphoria. Oh, I feel most euphoric when I sit down to pee.
Yes.
Laser hair removal for their butts, and things like that. Jamie, what are you saying? What are you thinking?
I guess I didn't realize these are trans identified individuals that work at the NSA, or I thought it was more just NSA employees talking about trans.
No, no, no. It was trans identified
And
I think
people
it
queer.
was a mix of
and
people
queer.
asking and answering
Yes.
questions.
So nobody got them the memo that these are not appropriate workplace server conversations, because
Well,
I
well,
don't
they
get
did
how this
now. They did
Well,
now.
they're a bunch of people who are good at discovering and keeping secrets.
or not.
But they're talking about it on a workplace listserv.
They,
Yeah.
Doesn't everybody?
talk
No.
about their laser butthole. But here's the
I
thing.
talk about my laser butt.
We're at work right now and we're talking about laser butts.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Well, but I mean, this was within the NSA. The only reason why this got out is because of NSA whistleblower that,
Mhm.
you know,
Somebody got
so
tired of it.
yeah, and they probably thought like we're enshrouded, like we're protected, you know, in this. Maybe they felt even more emboldened to do it because it's in the NSA, you know, they have these clearances and this is a LGBTQ DEI. And I mean, this is the kind of uh, conversation that this crazy shit mandates, you know, like it's,
Well, I
it shouldn't, but you know, when we're talking about all of these really inappropriate conversations about like, you know, I don't know.
I got a couple thoughts on this, then
Go for it.
I'll stop. But there's something really pernicious about the queer theory ideology because it is it is really a reaction against what some of them might call cis heteronormativity. So straight people are bad, straight society is bad, the structures that straight people have created are bad. Fundamentally, the United States is bad because of its racist history, which privileges straight and cis hetero people. And it's the goal of queer theory to work against this structure and to replace it with something that is imagined to be more equitable and fair and imbued with the values of social justice. And these are the people who are spies at the NSA. That's bad,
Very bad.
right? So I want to be conscious of what I'm saying here.
Corey, all I hear is you're saying everybody should be fired.
Well, I
You're okay.
believe that queer theory, that people who believe in queer theory, that as Americans they are completely entitled to those beliefs. I agree with that completely. I think that when you're talking about civil servants, that like we would not have people who are open jihadis who are calling for death to America serve in roles of civil servants. I'm not sure why.
Yeah, but
Like,
but there is an issue here because the heteronormative worldview,
yeah,
so many of them don't understand that the gay people are not the queer people, though. And that I just see that if we're doing these like mass,
yeah.
just
You're
roll
worried about how
everybody
people are
together,
reacting. Yeah.
you're gonna pull. What if there was just like a normal gay dude in that chat room who every once in a while was like, well, this is weird. I mean, like, but when you lump it all together, is there a
I
way
don't
to,
have a laser butt.
but I mean, like, I mean, I just hope that this is not just like everybody who ever was in that chat, because it's the LGBTQ, whatever, is all fired. Like, I hope they're at least like reading the messages, but that would involve somebody in the know to know about queer theory enough to be able to pull that apart and disentangle it.
Yeah.
Oh, somebody at the NSA knows.
Well, I don't think it was there was a discussion about that in terms of, you know, what kind of this could be a violation of policy and also perhaps unconstitutional if they're just rounding everybody up that was ever in this group
Okay.
and expelling them from their jobs. Also, I want to say that no judgment to anybody. I mean, when we're talking about the laser butthole, we're literally just talking about laser hair removal. And folks do that. It's totally, but we're talking about it in talking about this in a professional server. So that's what the issue is. Like, you know, people might think that, oh, gays
You're not
involved in this.
judging
Well,
laser hair butt removal.
right, right. I mean, look, yes, okay, normal gays might get pulled into this, but what was it last year, the year before, that picture that came out of that twink bent over in this Justice Department, getting
Oh,
ready to get railed?
yes,
I think so. They had sex on the Senate floor or
they
something.
did.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean,
That is
I,
not. Maybe it's really sexy in there. I don't know. I
I
haven't been.
mean, well, anywhere I
Mood
could,
lighting.
I don't know. But what
Nancy
disturbs
Pelosi's
me
desk.
disturbs me about the chat too is that it's like, hey, Chris Rufo writes it is like it's pronouns here. Like there's people in the NSA that go by it's, and have that's, although again, when you're thinking about the demographic, if you're thinking about folks that are like perhaps on the autism spectrum, I mean, this is maybe not so.
I mean, are you good at gathering the intelligence? That's really all I care about,
Right.
and I do think need to we need to share a certain amount of reality, but I don't. Your pronouns or how you identify yourself. I would rather. I mean, well, I guess we'll get into this, but not be talking about it at all if we don't if we aren't focusing on it and we're just focusing on your qualifications for the job and having a performance review and how'd you do at your spying, then that's fine with me. I don't want to fire people for their identities. I it's different if you have a mental health diagnosis or have some kind of, are a lifelong medical patient that impairs your ability to do your job, etc.
Right. If you just had a vaginoplasty and you have to dilate 3 times a day for a month, I don't think that you're combat ready.
Right.
Yeah, but to go back to the chat, I think it's less about it's like their workplace behavior and like, do they have the judgment and are they smart enough to not do this at work where it's really inappropriate and like probably making it a hostile work environment for their coworkers who maybe don't want to learn about how their coworkers treat their buttholes. I mean, that seems like a pretty fair grounds where it's like, you got it, like to work at the NSA, you probably got to be smart enough to know not to bring your whole self to work.
Right, that is the job. The job is not your whole self. Good point. Well, I think we're also talking about, queer theory is all about removing boundaries. And we're now living in a society with so few boundaries. Gender affirmation is kind of medicine and psychology without boundaries. It requires parenting without boundaries, right? Everything is sort of the toddler's point of view, barreling through everything. And as a reaction to that, these macho Republicans are coming in and establishing the boundaries. And I always think that's what people voted for when they voted for Trump. I'm not sure I'm not sure that Trump supporters knew they were voting for this level of chaos, Martin Gurry aside. Like some people were voting for the chaos as opposed to the Democratic stranglehold on institutions. But other people, I believe, thought they were getting daddy. Daddy is coming home and telling everybody time to go to bed, and you're getting up at 6 a.m. and parenting. The nation needed to be parented, but unfortunately now daddy turns out to have severe personality disorder. So
it's common, actually.
I do want there to be boundaries in terms of people who work in government. Now, Trump, if we have those boundaries and they're about mental health, Trump and Musk, I don't think would qualify. But I guess that's another topic. So I want saner people to run the country.
That's a big ask.
It's
It's
that's
a
crazy.
huge
That's
ask.
big. Yeah.
Huge.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're going to get that for a long time.
No, it's not going to be.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about pronouns. I
Can I sorry, Ben, I just want to like put a note on this before we even start.
Yeah, let's do it.
So my co-host of Heterodorks,
Mm-hmm.
Nina Paley, had asked if she can come lecture us about pronouns. And I was like,
forgot.
ugh, I don't want to be lectured. But it's okay. We recorded Heterodorks last night and she lectured me anyway. I cannot escape it. So sorry, I wanted to throw that in front.
No, that's great. And actually, I want you to start, but because I want to say too.
I
Oh,
need
God.
to add another caveat though too.
Okay, go ahead,
Okay.
Jamie.
So we are probably going to talk about my own family and my former spouse and my kids. And I just wanted everybody to know I have permission from her to have this conversation, and we're going to not name my kids,
Great.
but I'll reference them by age.
Great.
We come up with different names, like fake names.
Like Lord of the Rings names?
We're not going to queer their identities by they have names.
Frodo and Fievel.
Yes. Gimli.
No, but we
Okay,
appreciate
actually,
you
these
sharing
might be
your
better names.
personal
Okay,
experience with
but
that too.
Corey, you get to start the pronoun discussion.
Well, what I want to say is too, what Corey was talking about, Nina had tweeted, and said to me and said, let me come on there and lecture you guys about pronouns. And I was like, yes, I thought she was kidding. I thought, oh, she actually wants to come and lecture us. That doesn't sound too fun. So we kind of agreed, oh, that doesn't sound like such a great time. Let's just have a discussion about it instead. So what I'm wondering is, Corey, where do you guys differ? If you want to start, where do you and Nina differ? Is Nina a hardline sex-based pronoun and you are different, or what?
No, Nina's policy. She's not here to defend herself, so I apologize, Nina, because I know she's going to watch this. Her policy is to use sex-based pronouns. Her practice is to call all trannies he.
Sex-based okay.
Including the female ones.
And no, so I'm saying, so the female ones, does she call she? Would she call Buck Angel she?
No, she slips up and calls Buck Angel he.
Okay. But she doesn't typically slip up and call male trans-identified people she.
Not typically.
Not typically. Okay. All right. Well, where should we start? Go ahead.
You asked me, so I'm going to go.
Yes, go, please.
All right. I think that when we're talking about in the context, right? We have different contexts. This is the context of a podcast. We address each other because we're friends and friendly. So this is a different context than if we're going out and making an appeal for why a public policy should be X or Y, or if we're reporting on a news item. In the context where it's very important that sex is defined for the purposes of that context, I use sex-based pronouns at this point. In a private context, I would not insist on using language that I know would upset somebody face to face. And I really particularly don't insist on telling other people what language to use. So I think there's no inconsistency at all in using some language in some contexts and other language in other contexts. That's my 2 cents. All right, what y'all think?
Does anybody have a personal pronoun policy?
What do you
mean?
have, Eliza?
I think when I'm speaking generally, I will just, like, if I'm saying, like, okay, we're talking about girls who are transitioning, never going to refer to them in any way that's not, like, very clear that they're female, or boys who are transitioning, always going to be, okay, these boys, he, him, like, when talking generally, because I think it's really important to keep sex in the picture. I think when it's politically required to like talk to people who would be immediately shut down by what they would see as misgendering, I try to just avoid pronouns and have become very, very, very good at this. And I had to do it for my whole thesis also when I was talking exclusively about girls and young women. So I used female, but I didn't use any pronouns for like 120 pages, I think. That was a lot of work. And it doesn't make for the most elegant sentences, which was painful. And I think when it comes to one-on-one, there are people I know, and there are people who, whose company I really like, who very much want to be seen as a man or a woman. And in those cases, I would also just avoid using any pronouns because I really hate the equation of using the pronoun somebody wants you to use with like, this is my sign of like, I respect you. I really, really, really hate that because the way that I feel is like, okay, I don't see you as a woman, but I like you as a person. Like, isn't that kind of what we're all going for? Like to like respect someone as an individual without this extra ask of like, please see me as something that I'm not. I find that really hard. And so,
I mean, yeah, perhaps it's more respectful to be acknowledging reality, and maybe does it feel disrespectful to actually participate in
I mean,
the farce?
it feels like being asked to lie, which I'm not going to do out of respect for my own beliefs and respect for like the English language. But I wish, like, to those people, I wish that I could say, like, I really I like you and respect you as an individual person. I don't see you as,
Let me ask you this. How easy is it for you to totally adhere to sex-based pronouns all the time? Do you ever find yourself slipping up? Corey said that Nina sometimes will slip up and call Buck he or someone like that he. Do you ever slip up, and what happens?
Almost never. I mean, it's just I can't actually think of anybody where it's not really obvious to me. And part of that is that there is something about transition that makes people's sex much more salient and in many ways much more obvious. And maybe it's the contrast between the request or the accoutrement or whatever and their sex. But like, I mean, I remember going to WPATH and I had never been to a conference where I had like thought about like, okay, people are male or female. It just usually doesn't matter. Like I was going to public health conferences. It's not salient. But if you're going to a conference and the men all kind of look like linebackers and they're wearing little frilly stuff, and the women all have really deep voices, but really feminine gestures of like, making space for other people. And it's just really obvious.
Mm-hmm.
And I always find that kind of tragic that it like underlines something that in most parts of life would just not be that important otherwise. Yeah.
I don't think it's always obvious. Not all, I mean, I think there are cases where it's not always obvious, and that's just me. Sometimes.
Well, I think men are much worse
Okay.
at telling.
Okay.
Just having like, having spent a lot of time walking around with men and being in public, and they just won't notice, and it'll be like it's completely obvious. Like you can see, I don't know, like there's this place that I used to shop, and I still sometimes look at their website, like Madewell. They have a bunch. They started out with like one male model modeling female clothing. Now it's mostly male models modeling female clothing, which I find curious. And if you're scrolling down their page, they'll show like, a fraction of a person's body. Like they'll show you a belt and you can see just the waist, and it'll be like, that's a man. Or it's like pre-conscious.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I really
you find yourself like, I think you're right that women for safety reasons, I think about this a little bit more, but having been in this for so long, like I can pick up on like shoe size, hand size, like there's other elements too that now I'm like, this is gonna sound crazy, but I just see the trans people all around me now. Like I go to the gym and I'm like, oh, there's a trans guy. Yeah. I mean, it's like, yeah.
I
Yeah.
find myself unconsciously monitoring in a way. It used to be, I'd walk into a space, and without even knowing I'd do it, I'd be kind of looking for the Jews. I don't know why. And of course, you can look. Lots of people can be Jewish without quote unquote looking Jewish, but then some people, there are some Ashkenazi features. And anyway, that's just a thing I've done my whole life, despite having very little experience with actual Judaism. Yeah, I see you. I see you half Jewish over there.
Quarter Jewish.
I see, I can't, it's not working for
Ashkenazi.
me. You guys are trans Jewish. So I find myself now looking, there'll be a short person, bald person with a beard, and I am also checking the shoes and checking the hands and checking the chest. There's a shape, there's a kind
For
of
the pronoun pins.
well,
No.
they're not wearing those around here, but at some point I noticed that
No, they're wearing masks.
any short-haired
Yeah.
lesbian under 30 in my neighborhood had that kind of concave area, because top surgery doesn't, in some cases, when I went to top surgery show and tell at the Philadelphia Trans Wellness Conference, there was one really passing person who had worked out a ton and really could take the shirt off. Notice I avoided pronouns, and could walk down the street and nobody would know. But the other people, something was missing there, and a lot of them had little bellies too. So they were a strange shape, and I just find myself cataloging that, which is interesting if you think that we evolved as a species to catalog males and females for a variety of reasons, for safety, for reproduction, that somehow in the past 5 years, I've gone through an evolution where I'm cataloging people who've transitioned. And some of that is, I don't know if that's to monitor my speech, or it's just in me now after so many years in this rabbit hole. And because the numbers, I mean, I was just when I was in Austin, I mean, even more than New York, I think the percentage of trans people in Austin might be higher than the percentage in New York City, from just totally anecdotally. And I have talked to a lot of people about the pronoun issue, and I found feedback interesting. Like, one autistic woman told me, a middle-aged woman, that she said, "I'm very autistic. I need a rule. So now the rule is whatever the person wants, and I need that to be the rule." So that woman could not exist the way I exist, which is I have no policy. And in fact, I think there should never be a policy. I mean, I think we should. I love talking about grammar, and I'd have a whole conversation about dangling modifiers or whatnot, but this is actually, we never talk about grammar when we talk about pronouns. We're talking about values, and I don't think we should force people one way or another. And what concerns me is that we have policies that variably force people to accept that they must deny their own reality and affirm someone else's, or I suppose in some ways get in trouble for not doing it. And before we started recording, I had sent around the piece about Trump making all federal workers remove their pronouns from email signatures. It seems like a dumb thing to fight over. And yes, your employer has a right to dictate, what you can put in your email signature. But I also feel like it's a time waste. And what I'd like to stop doing is focusing on it and telling other people to focus on it. That's always been my goal, is to get us to get kids to stop thinking about this. But it's very, very scary when people are fired for not using pronouns, which, a teacher was an Ohio teacher, I think, and then won $400,000. It's scary that Colorado is entertaining a law making misgendering a crime that you can go to prison for. And I believe it is my right to call people by a pronoun unaffiliated with sex if I want, like Buck, which I will do partly because Buck is my friend and partly because Buck looks like a man to me. Or if it's what I'm used to, I will use the preferred pronouns of my preference. I do. The one place I agree there should be policy is on legal documents. And so in crime, if you commit a crime on your birth certificate, in your medical records, all that, I do think all that stuff should be sex-based. Jamie?
Yeah, I just feel like I was in your shoes, and now I can't be there anymore. And I can't be there anymore because probably in the last 6 months, so my ex-wife was trans-identified as a male. And in the period when she was trans-identified, we adopted 3 small kids. And we
Gimli,
got,
Legolas, and
yeah, so we got them, 2 of them when they were babies, like infants. And they all grew up knowing this person as dad and he. And now we're trying to navigate this recognition that I feel like I was complicit in lying to my children for years. And trying to figure out how to walk that back without being like that's the thing you don't want to be to your kids. Like, you don't want to be like, you want to be trustworthy and honest, and you want to be like the person to them that they can always rely on. And now I think both of us are in this position where we both feel a lot of regret for what we had done. And now we're trying to figure out how to walk this back with kids. And I used to think, okay, we should just do what people want and be kind and use these pronouns. But now this feeling like I have to explain to these children, reality is there's only one reality. And that reality all along was that this person was a female and is not your dad. And this is not about like the adoption or anything like that. It's just about who this person's reality is. And my ex-wife is like really being super kind and cautious, and we've consulted with therapy first, and we've consulted with Dr. Julia Mason, and everybody's kind of reassuring us that these kids are young enough that if we walk it back now, that they're not going to remember. But I don't know that I want to live in a society where we tell children in any way it's okay to lie.
So you're really thinking about the kids, in this situation, about kids in this situation, because I think, and that's a really valuable point and perspective to think about. A lot of times I enter these conversations thinking about women, because there are a lot of women like online that have very strong opinions about using sex-based language, and so that kind of perhaps even inspired this conversation today, because we see that a lot, and there's certainly a valid argument for that. But what Jamie's talking about is kids and not lying to kids, and that's absolutely an important point. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
And
it's
like,
just part and parcel with not affirming a kid as, oh yeah, you're a girl, when they are in fact a boy, and feeding into that not non-reality.
there's this other element of too, so that I feel like most of us know from like child psych that somewhere around that toddler age of like 3, 4 is when they start to recognize this difference. You're a girl, you're a boy. And I have 5 kids, and I've had so many of them as they're growing up. Like I've had my 3 and 4 year olds ask me, like, am I a he or am I a she? Like they are literally asking us as the grown-ups, explain to me my world, explain to me gravity, explain to me what is up and down and how my body works, and explain reality to me. And I just now feel like when we tell them this fundamental lie, I think it also erodes for them even the acceptance of gender nonconformity.
Yeah.
Because if they see a gender nonconforming person and they will ask, are you a he or a she? We are the ones setting reality for them. No, that's a she, but she's can look like this.
Hmm.
That's a he. This is reality. There is a fundamental reality that exists that we all have to abide by. And I just don't know that I just think it's a disservice to kids, period, if we set them up with this mindset that that fundamental reality is somehow based on quicksand, that it's shaky, that it could move later.
Okay, not to get all heady about this, but I'm right about this in my book. It's like this is essentially, we're talking about like the decolonization of sex, because we're talking about resorting to a gender-based perspective of looking at people rather than a sex-based, reality-based, and also thinking about sexual orientation like based on desire. This is a gender-based thing. So it's almost like there's this push and that's why there's such a link between queer theory and post-colonial theory, is there's this link to return us to decolonize our minds and return us to perceiving people as as sex roles. I mean, if
Mhm.
in some ways they look at the Fafafine and they look at other cultures that relegate gender nonconforming people who are typically same-sex attracted. This is totally apart from autogynephilia or autoandrophilia, if that's a thing. You know, talking about HSTS, they relegate those folks to different roles in society, specifically the males. And so this is people that are bound up in queer theory and post-colonial theory and really brainwashed by that are looking to those cultures to see them as, it's very Rousseauian. It's this idea that civilization, or what they would say colonization, is corrupted man, and the truly noble person is the one that is, I mean, that's really what this is about. And so what we're arguing for is like, yes, sustaining reality and, what they would call Western epistemologies, but which is rooted in the scientific method, is rooted in what we've learned about reality through rigorous testing, through the scientific method. We've got where we get to as close as we can to it through this process. That's how we know that everyone's male. That's how we know that 0.018% of humans are born with disorders of sexual development. And that, they can still be classified as male or female, and that there are a couple edge cases and so on. I mean, this is how we know these things, because we have these tools and these ways to do that.
But
Um,
oh, Eliza, go ahead.
Oh, so I was just gonna say what Jamie's talking about. I think you make a particularly good point where it's kind of like we're like stunting development of children at the stage where they think if you change your clothes, you change your sex, which of course is going to decrease like the understanding of like gender nonconformity and having space. You're going to, keep kids in this place where there's not an underlying reality of the body, and you're just like, oh, wearing a dress, female, having a cool job, you know, whatever. But the other thing is, like, you are telling kids that you can't name reality without permission, which seems incredibly dangerous thing to teach kids. This has been, you know, what we have been teaching girls when they see boys in their locker room. Okay, well, you can't name that reality without permission, and that makes them tremendously more vulnerable. And I think that that's a really important part of the conversation too, is like, you need to like give kids tools to recognize and speak out if something is wrong, and not to like suppress and wait and see what they're allowed to observe about a situation.
First of all, I love this phrase about you can't name reality without permission. However, I'd argue that young people might be able to handle this kind of personalized pronoun thing and still understand sex. Were it taught to them that way. When I think about the autistic woman saying, I just need a rule. I don't care what the rule is. I just need a rule. The problem with the rule, of course, is when you can't name reality, or that, you know, there is someone in my family with a nouveau pronoun that I did not react well to, and that person no longer speaks to me. So, you know, it's not just the pronouns and the policies, it's the expectations around them, it's the teachings around them, that if someone doesn't use your pronoun, they're harming you. And I was thinking about another story. A social worker friend told me that she was working with a mom, and the mom's son, I think, was working with a different therapist at this place, and the kid was trans identified. And in order to work with the mom, my friend needed to use sex-based pronouns because the mom was not accepting her child, was resistant to changing pronouns. And my friend got like reamed out, you know, in supervision and among her fellow therapists for not demanding identity-based pronouns in the session with the mom. And my friend was saying, but I'm working with the mom. It's the mom's reality. It's the mom's experience that matters. And they had this, I mean, it was a really awful thing that she went through. And that's where I think we get into real trouble. Could we have this kind of like pronouns are not attached to sex anymore, and we hold them lightly, like calling, you know, when we used to say tranny or drag queens and call them she, and we all knew, you know, when we used FTM or M to F, and we all knew the reality and could detach the word from it with lightness and not feel like we compromised ourselves. That was fine with me. When someone is unable to do their job, or prevented from doing their job, or punished for doing their job, or family members are taught to reject other family members for not adhering to their policy, that's where I think we get into trouble. And that's why I think having policies about pronouns other than in official documents and kind of, I don't even know what I mean though. I mean, I think when you have the crime, you know, when you have the first, you know, first female admiral, and it's Rachel Levine, when you have a woman serial killer and it's a man, I mean, then we're in real trouble, right? But if we were just calling Rachel Levine she as a kind of nod to, I see you like to wear women's clothes, that would have been fine. But we stopped doing that because we institutionalized and censored everything around the pronoun.
But it's also not what's wanted is to be like, oh, well, we're all just, wink, wink.
Wink,
Like
wink.
what they want. The idea is you can't indicate that like, okay, well, we're just playing along. We don't really believe it. The whole idea is that you have to seem like you believe it. Otherwise, it's not validating.
You're
It's
an
not what's
infidel.
wanted.
You're an infidel.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lisa, there's this other element here, though, that I wonder, when we were doing wink, wink, play along, we hadn't done the slippery slope into kids. And now that we have, and now that we're like, oh God, what did we do with the kids? Now we have to like scale this back. Now there's this part of me that is like, when we were doing the wink, wink, play along,
Mhm.
were we quietly telling, doesn't this part of this come back to like with kids, like you can't say, oh, watch me smoke this cigarette. It's bad. Don't do this. Like cigarettes are bad while I smoke the cigarette. Like while we're calling Rachel Levine she, her, but then we're also telling kids, this is a bad path. You can't do this. Like, aren't we kind of like still, sorry for the language, but fucking with the kids?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what you're pointing out and what is that ultimately there's Corey changed changed his
Pronoun
screen
hell.
name to help in pronoun hell. You're not enjoying this, Corey?
What?
You're not enjoying our conversation?
I
pronoun
just,
hell.
Heavy?
no, it's fine.
It's just
fine.
day
I just-
two because Corey
I'm gonna-
had a
It is day
lecture.
2.
Yeah.
Right
it
after
had-
this, I got to go in a minute. There's some
Okay.
horses I need to beat to death.
Is there
Okay.
anything that you want to add before you go?
Yes, be kind.
Excellent. Well,
Actually, I do need to go
Okay.
do some work.
thank you,
Okay.
Corey. Good luck.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Godspeed.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so what there I think there's always a stronger argument for acknowledging the reality. There it ultimately is a stronger argument. Any debate, it's going to be actually acknowledging fundamental reality for all of these reasons is more important than okay being kind. I think with me personally, my issue is when I look at, well, what is my aversion to perhaps calling Brianna Wu he in a podcast or to Brianna or something like that. I don't want to be mean, one, like I don't want to intentionally hurt someone's feelings. I also don't want to be seen as mean. That I think that is a big thing for why folks are really react to when people show up in their comments and say, "Oh my gosh, it's he. How can you do this? You're part of the problem. You're part of the problem." Well, first of all, I do have a big allergy to when folks try to police speech. I think that I would love to do less of that than more of that. Now, can you present an argument for why it's important? Yes, and ultimately I'm going to agree with you. I think that there is a stronger argument, much stronger argument for acknowledging reality, and maybe I will come to that. Maybe I will get to that point but sometimes I just slip up and I don't even think about it. So sometimes it's more work for me to use sex-based pronouns or reality-based pronouns than it is otherwise because I'm just used to doing it the other way. So there's that argument for not wanting to be seen as mean. And so when you're caught up in this, well, there's some people that think it's so horrible and really, really cruel to misgender someone. And then there's other people that think, oh my gosh, it's so horrible and really, really cruel or anti-woman or anti-female to do this. And now, Jamie, you're bringing up the kids. I mean, but with that argument between, oh, this is cruel versus this is anti-women and it's hard to navigate that, I think, because there's so much emotion and tension there. But yes, the argument is stronger for acknowledging sex-based pronouns. And I think I just want to say a really quick anecdote. And I think about this one situation is because a while ago, my husband and I were listening to Blocked and Reported, and they were covering Andrea James. And Andrea James, for listeners who don't know, everybody probably does, but transgender map, website creator, harasser of Michael Bailey for writing The Man Who Would Be Queen and talking about Ray Blanchard's autogynephilia. Alice Dreger wrote a book, Galileo's Middle Finger, which is excellent, but Andrea James also harassed Drager by showing up at Alice's place of work at Northwestern, I believe it is, Northwestern University. And, um, so I think we might all be on that website. Puts personal identifying information about people, about their kids, etc. Just,
Are we all on that website?
I don't know. I am. I know Lisa is.
I have a very
Jamie?
short article the last time I checked.
Okay,
Yeah, I think we all
great.
are. Okay.
We're all famous. Okay, so when we were listening to this and they're talking about and they're calling Andrea James she, right? And they're talking about, this history of this. And my husband and I are listening to this, right? And we get to it, and afterwards I say, that's just the really fucked up thing because, when we're talking about Andrea James showing up at Alice Dreger's office and saying like, "Bad move, mommy," I messaging her and saying, "I showed up today. Your staff was a lot nicer than you would be," or whatever he said in his email, and we'll meet again soon. This is a male person showing up at a woman's office
Yeah.
and leaving them threatening messages. I mean, and my husband said, "Oh, wait, they're talking about they're talking about a male? They're talking about," and I said, "Oh, yeah, Andrew James." And he did not know because they never said a trans woman.
Yeah.
They never said, or perhaps they did, but he missed it. But they never said, they were just saying she. And it's like in these situations, that is vital. We're talking about, like Lisa said, we're talking about crime, but this is very, very important to understand and to acknowledge. And language is very strong. And so when someone says banning trans women from female sports, you're still saying women. You're still saying
Yeah.
sex. And so saying banning males from female sports, I mean, it's so important. It's something in the brain happens with the way that we're conditioned as humans to understand sex and its relationship to language and how we interpret that. Yes, the argument is ultimately so much stronger for acknowledging reality when we're talking about pronouns and talking about people's sex. It just is.
Yeah. You just can't. Oh, sorry, Jamie.
I just wanted to say though, like to Lisa, like I get your position entirely, and I also totally agree with the concept that I don't think I should be the one dictating or policing or putting words in anyone else's mouth. And so like on my own Twitter feed, I'm never going to block somebody if they use sex-based pronouns or they don't about somebody who we're talking about. Or if Lisa and I are hanging out and Lisa refers to Buck as he, I'm not going to be like, "Lisa, what are you doing?" Like there's no need. I don't think there's a need to do that. This is a personal decision and a place for us to land like on our own. I don't know that we need to be going around policing anyone else.
Yeah. But I think Ben's example is a really great example of how it can be really misleading. And that also came up a couple of weeks ago on Blocked and Reported, where Trace and Jesse were talking about the Zizians, the like trans vegan murder cult. And they refer to Ziz the whole time as she, and then at the end they're like, "I feel like in some of the media coverage it's not clear that this person is trans," and it was like, you've just been talking about him as a like the whole time. But I think Ben is totally right about like, you just can't make the argument that like, okay, we need sex-based spaces or sex-based sports or whatever if you have to call someone a woman. And the ACLU, do you remember that tweet from the ACLU where they were like, and it might have been Chase Strangio specifically, it's like, it sounds like you don't think that trans girls are girls, and it's like,
If you don't
Yeah.
support trans girls in girls sports, what you're saying is that trans girls aren't really girls. Something
and it's
like
like,
that.
yeah, and
Yeah.
and that's kind of the way that I
That's why
feel
they're
about
trans.
right, the pronouns, which is like, if you don't mean it, don't say it, because at some point people will like, a young person will take you literally and think, okay, well now I'm a girl, except until you have to set some kind of boundary to protect the rights of actual girls. And then it's like, oh, well, you didn't mean it. It just feels like, we're kind of leading some individual people who are vulnerable and also just kind of like leading society on. And then it feels way meaner to have to draw a line at some point.
Well, yes. I'm thinking a couple of things that I'll try to make very short. One is this thing about, it all changes once we introduce it to kids. And of course, we introduce these ideas to kids at the same time that social media expands. I mean, so much happens at the same time, which I think made people kind of even more literal. I think the constant onslaught of information and the kind of like everyone creating their own reality from their computer with less interpersonal interaction, and all of that skewed our young people's understanding of the world. But the other thing is that the kids weren't over on 11th Avenue in Manhattan before that was the High Line. That was where you would go to pick up a transsexual hooker. And it was also kind of one of the only places transsexuals could make money. So that wasn't a good thing, but they were literally and figuratively marginalized, which kept them oppressed, but also kept it away from the children. And as they get centered, they're also interacting with children. And then we have to deal with, well, what does it mean now when children who are more literal and who think, who are at the gender identity stage, which is 2 to 3 years old, is not being able to distinguish between sex and sex stereotypes. And yes, there's a certain amount of keeping everyone at that toddler level when we attach pronouns simply to sex stereotypes or to self-conception. But now we're in a different place now where we've introduced all these ideas to kids. But I'm also thinking about a dad of a socially transitioned kid who said to me, I don't understand why can't we just let everybody do their thing? And I said, let's not talk about it. We're having a nice time. But, what I would say if we follow up with it another time is, but when you ask me to call your daughter you're not letting me do my own thing. And so you can do your own thing. You are legally allowed to. But asking me to participate in that when I know very well that this person is female, and when I don't, this is a child who was suffering, and social transition provided relief. At least in the short term. And I witnessed that. Do I think that was the right path? Probably not, because where's it going to go? And isn't it better? That's a person who hasn't walked around in the world yet as a gender nonconforming female, which admittedly is difficult. And it's better if you figure out how to do that. But I like the idea of why can't we all get along, but I don't feel like, asking me to participate in that is doing it. And at the same time, I want to acknowledge the vicious, whatever they are, TERFs or radfems or wing of gender critical people who go after all of us if we have any wiggle room. And in some ways, I'm less afraid of them than I am of Andrea James and autogynophiles who are organized. And, some of them, it sounds crazy, but there's a kind of army of people working for Andrea James who follow everything we do and compile these endless dossiers on us and put our family names and personal information up there. And it can't be categorized as harassment. There's nothing we've been able to do. It's the first thing that comes up when you Google us, because it's a place that gets a lot of sight and is added to all the time. So it's very, those people are friggin' scary. And maybe because these turfy pronoun police are women. Maybe I'm less frightened of them, whatever it is, but I don't like it at all. I do not like these women who want to destroy me because I will refer to Buck as he. And it hurts my brain less to call Buck he. So I'm just going to do it. And I don't mind. Buck is I just don't mind. I can handle that ambiguity. But those people are really in the way of making progress. I think the people who are demanding this kind of moral purity around pronouns, these are people who yesterday went after Corey on Twitter. You know, we can't use the slippery slope argument all the time for everything because we end up with Project 2025 if we want hard edges all around. And what I would rather than pronoun police or pronoun policies is giving people the tools to understand that this is a belief system, that there are a lot of problems with it, and that they have the right to reject it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
I've been thinking about my non-gender thing while you were talking because I really like your sweater. And
My sweater?
Yeah, I was like,
I bought this in a thrift shop in Colorado. It's got sparkles and it's
amazing. I was like, what's gonna be my non-gender thing? I was like, Lisa's sweater.
You know,
and tulips. My tulip bulbs are coming up.
Oh, that's nice.
I'll make my non-gender thing when you go to any city. Go to the thrift store in the most expensive neighborhood. Go to the Salvation Army in the most expensive neighborhood, and you will come back.
End up with a good sweater.
You'll come back with a good sweater. So that's my recommendation for the week. Thank you, Jamie. That wasn't gonna be, but
I really like it.
What about you, Eliza? You got one? Do you want me to give one before so you can think about it still?
Yeah.
Okay. Mine is, I actually have one this week. Mine's The White Lotus. I do really enjoy that show in the third season on HBO or Max or whatever you want to call it. It's very good. And, it's also very Mike White, I think, is the creator of it. It's very good because it's picks at wokeness, it picks at all of these, taboos that we're not supposed to acknowledge. And I kind of think about it, and there's one argument that says like, oh my gosh, this is so brilliant. There's also another argument that's like, actually, this is really easy to do. It's just stop injecting, ideology into art, and this is what you can get. This is it's like a throwback to what art and entertainment used to be in a way, and that's what I love about it. But it's this season's in Thailand, and Parker Posey's great, very funny, and has a good cast, and as always, so I'm enjoying that.
Is that the one, I haven't seen the show, but is that the one where there's a female character who says they just want to meet a nice guy who's not non-binary?
That's in the first season, I think.
Okay. Great line.
That sounds like it would be in that show.
Yeah. I think I'm going to have to piggyback on Jamie's about things starting to grow because I saw snowdrops yesterday. And I'm very excited because it means that maybe it's almost over.
I think it is because my tulips were they're really coming up.
A little bit. Yeah.
Let's remind people that Jamie and Corey have this event in New Hampshire that we'll link to in the show notes.
Yep.
Also Lisa Littman is starting a new gender dysphoria study and looking for participants, so we'll link to in that. And let's also remind people that for paid subscribers, Ben compiles a fantastic weekly news roundup of what has gone on in the gender world in the past week, which goes out Friday afternoons usually, right?
Friday at 4 p.m.
Friday, 4 p.m. And if you become a paid subscriber, I believe you can get all the back issues too. And where can people find us and how can they contact us?
Well, and also one more thing too, for founding members, we have coming up which is likely going to be, and I'm going to put this in the newsletter, but send out a blast about it. March 18th at 5 will be, which is a Tuesday,
Eastern.
I believe, Eastern, 5 o'clock Eastern time, a private chat, Zoom virtual chat with all the hosts, all of us, for founding members. So, if you would like to join us with it, we'll have more events like that in the future. If you would like to join us for that, becoming a founding member, it would be great because we love to get to know people. I'm excited to listen, to get to know our founding members more and to hear their stories and what drew them to listening to us and so on. So that's coming up too.
How did they become founding members?
So informed, go into our Substack, informed dissent. Let's see here. Informed dissent
Podcast. I made it long.
Yes. It is informed dissent podcast.substack.com. So, that's where you can subscribe to be a founding member, a regular member, paid member, or just a free subscriber. And that's how you can do that. And then you can find us we're on YouTube, Spotify, obviously Substack, and Apple Podcasts. And I guess wherever else, people can get theirs. Hopefully it kind of uploads to that, but it definitely goes to those specifically. And then you can find us all on X. All of us are Eliza, me, Corey, Jamie Whistle at Jamie Whistle, Lisa at Lisa Sellen Davis. I'm at Ben Appel. Eliza's at Eliza Mondegreen, and then Corey is at Heterodorks. Is it just Heterodorks or Heterodorks Pod?
I think it's
Anyway,
yeah, we'll put
yeah. Because Corey is also a co-host of another podcast. He's a two-time
very
winner.
good.
Where you can hear a lecture about pronouns this week if you
Yes.
missed that from our.
If you haven't had enough from us.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for listening.
All right.
Take care. Have a great week.
Bye.